3 years. It has been 3 years since that incident. 3 years since I put myself out there and got into the dating field. Despite it being years since I met her, I hear her voice anytime I'm alone, and I often felt her touch on my skin whenever I laid restless in bed. Not a day would go by without me reflecting on the past, which I agree is unhealthy, but it was a force of habit. I feel that I owe you all an explanation. I used to work for a fast food joint as a cashier. It was a thankless job with many an irritable customer you could imagine, or I would sometimes get tasked with cleaning the restrooms, and believe me, anyone would be driven mad once they see what horrors were left in there. I was an ordinary man working a 9-to-5 job and lived all by my lonesome in an aging apartment, but I would have had it no other way. I was never a sucker for romance or dating, but there laid the problem. Ever since graduation, my former classmates have settled down and married, and filled their social media accounts with photos of their children, or they had achieved an American dream and became successes. As I'd already alluded to, it never bothered me that I was a bachelor with no real responsibilities or hang-ups. However, that would change when my younger brother got married. Richie was the apple of my mother's eye, being the favorite of the family for good reason. He was tall, athletic, academically competent. I hadn't seen him in years, but from what I heard, he met a beautiful woman during a trip and they hit it off well. They wasted little time with announcing their engagement, and believe me, it was a large event with over 100 people coming to attend the, quote, holy matrimony, end quote. I should have been happy for my brother, since he deserved the world and much, much more. But that only proved to be a temporary distraction as my mother became more and more obsessed with my single life. It started during the after party, which should have been directed towards Richie and his wife, but instead, my mother came along and nonchalantly put me on the spot by asking me about my future plans. When I told her, she kept probing and probing out of dissatisfaction in my answer. I tried to keep cool, but my buttons were eventually pushed and we ended up disrupting the ceremony. I hadn't spoken to my brother since. Ever since then, my mother would call or text me every day, badgering me on when I would consider dating. It became even more burdensome when my brother announced that he and his wife would be having a child soon. Day in and day out, one of the only forms of discussion we ever shared was my mother asking when I was going to get married, to which I would also snarkily respond with an "I'm working on it." It would all reach its zenith on one rainy day, after an especially grueling day of work, which I won't elaborate much beyond saying that involved some rugrats and their overbearing mother. I was to leave for the day when I received a text message from none other than my mother. I groaned to myself and entered my password into my phone and saw a picture of Mom with my brother Richie and his wife. It was some days after the birth of his son. Underneath it was a sentence that says, "You know that life is short, dear. I hope that you settle down soon. Can't let your mother wait forever." I wanted to scream. This was the tactic that she would always use against me, the old "I brought you into this world" excuse. I was supposed to be eternally grateful that my mother gave birth to me, which I was, but that was indicative of her conditional love. She raised me and nurtured me all for the purpose of me one day returning the favor and blessing her with some bundles of joy. I never understood that mentality in the slightest. Since when was it ever written into stone that "thou shalt give your parents grandchildren"? And why was it considered an ungrateful gesture to choose against bringing another life into the world when there are so many other kids out there that would be better suited to be adopted or loved? Perhaps it had to do with establishing a legacy, but Richie's son already filled that role for her, so why was I not let off the hook? Just maddening. I crammed my phone back into my pocket and groaned. It was apparently loud enough that it alerted one of my coworkers. When they asked me what the matter was, I explained everything to them, from my mother's insistence that I hook up and how I never was interested in it. He told me of a speed date event that was happening at the town's auditorium and that I should give it a shot. Naturally, I declined to go at first, but he was much like my mother with being persistent. When he said that his cousin would be attending, I felt it was enough to ease me into it since I had known his cousin for some time. I sighed in defeat and took a flyer for the dating game. It wasn't like I had much planned for the rest of the week anyway, I thought, but it was nevertheless a chore to go to one. If I was lucky, I could snag a few drinks before going home, and if push comes to shove, I could always tell a white lie about meeting a significant other and my mother wouldn't be the wiser. Not bothering much on my attire, I wore a plain dress shirt and khakis. The moment I opened the door to the auditorium, my nose was assaulted by a cocktail of different scents and high-class whiskey and expensive perfumes that made me nearly cough up a lung. I could tell some of the attendees were bursting with confidence, with women casually chatting with men in their low-cut dresses and prim and proper aesthetics. For what it was worth, my coworker's cousin was there, and she seemed just as indifferent about it as I was. She was a brunette with a small stature. She wore a green dress that was not as revealing as the other women's dresses, and she had thin framed glasses over her eyes. We talked for a while and took jabs at how stupid the whole occasion was, but how we were convinced into it for different reasons. As the time for the speed dating approached, we went our separate ways to mingle with the others. If I had foreseen where everything would go after this point, I would have decided to leave the dating game with her. The buzzer sprang to life and I regrettably shuffled at the first table. The first woman was a 22-year-old mother of 3, which was admittedly a turn-off on its own. Dating was one thing, but doing so with the knowledge that she'd have to juggle with taking care of her kids was too much for me. The woman explained to me how she had been on different drugs when she was younger, such as methamphetamine, but she had been sober for a while, which was at the least good news to hear. However, I ended up turning her down, and she seemed to take it well. Hopefully she could get her issues resolved and find someone deserving of her. The next woman was about 10 years older with white hair, and she mentioned having grandchildren. Much like before, it was something I did not want to deal with, this time a new generation of children. She was an exceptionally kind senior citizen, but she did get the hint that I wasn't interested in giving the relationship a try. She also was a little hard at hearing. The timer went off, but she stayed in the chair for a few more seconds until I gave her directions. The next table was empty, so I didn't even bother going to that one. There was one lady around my age that I did consider, but I did not have my phone on me at the time, so it wasn't like I could have asked for a number. Besides, she was more confident than I could attest to, and she'd probably prefer someone who was just like her in that mentality rather than some cynical man. I would have called it a day then and there, but then she got my attention. There was something about her that felt ethereal, celestial, even. She had long, flowing black hair, vibrant green eyes that sparkled like emeralds, a curvaceous body and plentiful bosom. Her skin was without blemish, reminding me of those porcelain dolls I'd seen in the window of antique stores. She wore all black, but that only made her more alluring. She spoke in a bubbly, flirtatious tone. For some indiscernible reason, I became hooked on her words as if they held me captive and burrowed into my brain. At that time, I thought she was the idyllic woman. It is hard for me to remember all we talked about because, if I'm being honest, she was doing the most talking with her stretching words out intentionally as she whispered sweet nothings into my ears. Who she was, no one could tell. Not once did she ever let slip where she came from, nor her family life. What she did tell me, however, was that she was a graduate of an all-girls university and how she studied dreams ranging from what causes them and what they represent. More and more she ate away at my time until I couldn't help but find myself falling ever so deeper for her. I knew that none of it made any sense, and there had to be some sinister designs behind those irresistible green orbs of hers, but it was like an invisible set of hands was forcing me to continue gawking her, even turning away once sent a dull pain through my head. She had that intoxicating giggle of hers that complemented her playful behavior. I'd nearly forgotten the timer as it buzzed, but I was already convinced I'd picked my choice. Since she was new to the neighborhood, I took it upon myself to show her around. We both went to a bar and sat at the counter and casually spoke to each other as a bartender served us. She told me things, many things. She lectured me on the physical world using such jargon language I could not understand, and yet she was very elaborate and confident in what she had to say. She spoke of interdimensional travel and the odd alien shapes that made up the fabric of our reality and how time as we know it was an illusion. My brain throbbed as I tried to catalog all that I was told. My recollection of that night continued to escape me. It must have been an eternity since we were together because I next found myself back home, my brain boiling from everything that happened. I was awake for hours up until I felt the urge to sleep tugging at my eyelids. Even in the recesses of my mind, the woman appeared in my dreams, During one of the most bizarre, I found my soul projected from my body in the flickering of her fingers, and she revealed the astral plane to me. Everything she said was not without truth. Structures of immeasurable size and shape were constructed with ever more bizarre shapes not known to this world in extraterrestrial metal. Yet still there were these anomalies, living creatures resembling the earth and sea stars and amorphous bodiless cells the size of man. The woman danced with these inhumane abominations, bereft of clothing and chanting odd, alien languages. Before a large, black cauldron, a knife manifested in the inky blackness of the air, and she roasted it underneath the fire that lit the furnace. The blade glowed from the intense heat, and when I realized what she was about to do, I tried to look away, but something kept me from turning my head in disgust. The woman held her arm over the boiling pot and tediously carved the hot tip into her forearm and went down. The scent of her iron-rich blood wafted in my nostrils as I watched beads of crimson fall into the frothing mix. The screaming grew a few more octaves, becoming increasingly blasphemous. I then awoke with a sweat, finding that I was back in my body, but my very soul was tainted. I could not decipher if it was merely a nightmare or if it was real. I could still smell the scent of burning flesh and hear the thunderous chants of worship in my ears. As the chance to sleep was ripped away from me, I decided to pass the time by watching television. Remote in hand, I pressed the button to activate the device and flipped through a few channels with disinterest. The static buzz as pictures started to flicker on screen. For whatever reason, I stopped on one channel. It was detailing an old forensic case that happened a year or two ago. The case, nevertheless, felt just as recent. They're a family known as the Denvers. The family patriarch, Kyle Denver, was once a very active member of the community, running charities for disaster relief and applying for the role of an alderman a few times during the town's elections. He was a graduate of a community college east of town and worked at a factory for 6 years. A single father, Kyle would raise his elder son Neil and his baby boy Frederick, both 10 and 2 months old respectively. Everyone was shocked by the sudden deaths, but the police deemed it as a murder-suicide. Apparently, Kyle was not as stable as he was letting on, or that was the running theory. What is known about Kyle is that he had met a young woman a few months ago who seemed perfect in every way, but then something odd happened. Kyle would gradually leave home less and less with him, slowly abandoning the charities and town work until one day he stopped altogether. His extended family became aware of this, but any time they would come over, it would be that female answering, or he would only speak through the door. Witnesses reported on hearing him mutter things under his breath, but could never fully dissect what he was trying to say. When the authorities found his body, he was in the hallway with mad rambling scrawled on the walls. In the room adjacent, they found Neil with a bag around his head wound so tightly the strings dug into the skin of his neck. Little Frederick was found smothered in his sleep in his crib. The authorities were first alerted when Neil's teachers reported on his unusual disappearance. After breaking into the home, the police were met with the body of Kyle having burnt to a crisp. Around the area were continuous scribblings, some starting off articulate before devolving the further Kyle's mind broke. His girlfriend was never found. While they browsed the house for possible motivations, the fact the house was completely wrecked was made apparent, with holes smashed into the floors and clothes scattered astray throughout the pigsty. In his bedroom, they uncovered his writings and were horrified. This woman, if you can call her that, devastated my life. For countless nights and months, she has told me things, whispered maddening things into my ears. I still hear her voice in my head, violating my thoughts, tainting my very soul. Beneath her attributes bellies the blackest and most putrid of souls, and the only thing I can recommend is that she die. Do not leave her corpse behind. I have failed once. Cremate the body. Scatter the ashes to the farthest regions of the world. Do not allow for this wicked woman to live. With a running theory that Kyle went mad and killed his sons before himself, the case was considered closed. Kyle's family, however, thought it wasn't like him to do such a thing, but with no sign of his girlfriend's whereabouts, there were no other potential suspects. I watched the program for the remainder of the night, and I headed to my room at 5 a.m. When I woke, I saw my speed date standing over me. Odd, I did not recall letting her in. Every part of me urged me to run or alert someone, but I was captured by her emerald eyes and long, raven hair. Before I could say anything, those spidery words of hers reeled me in again. Something about her voice was so inhuman, but soothing at the same time. As we headed out the door, I couldn't shake the memory of my nightmare away. It all felt so real. The more I mused on the oddity, a cold hypothesis came to mind. Did she teleport into my house? And before I even knew it, I was attending more dates with the black-haired siren, and I sank further into her charms. That intoxicating giggle of hers never failed to excite me. Oftentimes, whenever we were out, she would rub up against me, giving me full access to her body. Days went by, then weeks. I was putty in her hands. I found myself sharing my deepest, darkest secrets with her because she felt comfortable to vent to. Perhaps that was the reason why I was always indifferent with dating in the past, that I have been through things where I chose to be distant from people out of belief that I would be hurt by it. Months went by, and it was the most magical experience I ever had. About 7 months later, I decided to pop the question to my girlfriend. Unsurprisingly, she said yes and practically jumped into my arms. With that, I felt relieved I would no longer hear my mother badger me about settling down. After she had frequently made unanticipated visits to my apartment, I allowed her to move in with me. Had I known ahead of time just how poor of a decision that was, I would have ended things then and there. I don't know when it started, but I started to grow disinterested in leaving home. For her part, my fiancé would lounge around the house, reading and doing slight provocations to catch my attention. Not that she really had to do anything. After all, she was beautiful. All I could ever need or want was her. And so, that was what happened. I drifted apart from my job as I became more of a recluse. My rent started to become due, but even then, I couldn't shake the urge to stay home. Day after day, I neglected to do the basic necessities like keeping my apartment clean as used clothes began to pile up and dirtied in massive heaps. Food was becoming increasingly scarce, but I never once felt hunger pangs. Soon enough, I neglected the necessity of bathing as I further became enraptured by the emerald globes. My dreams remained the same ever since she moved in. Dreams of my spirit exiting my body and being whisked to other planets, and the vast ritualistic sacrifices the women participated in kept me awake for long periods of time. More chanting in unearthly tongues and mind-melting abnormalities became my reality with every waking second. A few months went by and my family started to get worried. In fact, after the huge disaster that was my brother's after party, he was called by my mother to check on me. However, I couldn't even hope to meet him in my current state. The smell of my apartment was rancid with the smell of decaying food and rotting clothes. My vision became blurry the more I fixated on my girlfriend. Richie tried to break the door down, but he told me later that some disembodied supernatural force prevented him from smashing the door. I heard him shout that he would come back, but a part of me wished that he would not bother. My girlfriend continued to erode my mind. I was forgetting everything, even my own name. Every night she would lean over my bed and whisper in my ear. Her voice, once something that filled me with so much joy, was replaced with dread as she told me of the throne of Azthoth existing in the center of time and space, the very center of chaos, and how demonic gods played on chaotic drums and flutes as they revolved around the mighty throne of the ultimate chaos. She ripped my soul from my body and forced it to traverse the universe, sometimes swapping it with that of a Shoggoth. My brother and the coworker who introduced me to the speed dating event met up at a restaurant one day to discuss their concerns in regard to me. Anytime the coworker would ever come over to my apartment, I would always be preoccupied, while my girlfriend would answer the door in my stead. The nauseating fumes of the decaying materials wafted seeped through the door of my apartment, with it becoming such a concern that the landlord was contemplating calling the police to force me out of my empire of rot. Richie himself couldn't comprehend how some woman could have such an influence over me, and turns out he was asking all the right questions. A thin, aging man with a receding hairline intruded on their conversation the moment he heard Richie mention my girlfriend's dark hair and green eyes. Turns out he was well aware of her. However, My brother had to buy him a drink so he could wet his lips. Years ago, his brother met an exceptionally beautiful young dame with a bubbly attitude and pure complexion when he was assigned to demolish an old building. Despite the fact that dogs growled in her presence, his brother was deeply in love with her, but even he could not explain why. The man scoffed as he wrapped his lips around the mouth of the wine bottle. To be frank, the woman herself was truthfully average-looking as far as he was concerned. Regardless, his sibling was head over heels for this girl, and the two dated for months. During that time, his relationship would end up cutting into his occupation, and after several failed attempts to notify him of the consequences, he was fired. He couldn't care less because that meant he could spend more time with the woman he deluded himself into loving. The aging man stopped for a moment, his words becoming harsher as he choked up with grief. Everything went to hell. His brother sent him messages discussing how his date was truly not of this mortal plane, and how she would whisper into his ears, driving him ever so mad, and ranted about her perverting his soul and sending it to hellish realms all without his consent. The once beautiful woman destroyed his very will, and by the time he became aware of what was going on, it was too late. He would be found in his bathroom, hanged. Soon after he finished, another man spoke up. He relayed a story about a family friend who also met a raven-haired beauty with green gems and how she encroached on his married life. Like with the elder's story, the woman enticed him and slowly integrated herself. His wife and children tried their best to get control of him, but the story ended tragically. His wife and 4 children were found with gunshot wounds to the cranium, and the husband slashed his throat and was found over the kitchen sink. Like before, the woman was never found. Yet, still, there came more and more reports on this insidious individual, with some spanning back years. Each encounter had a sinister pattern. She would meet a man, seduce them, drive them batshit insane, and then they would kill their entire families and themselves. The same was true if the man was a bachelor. It was there that the Denver's family massacre made much more sense. Poor Kyle met a beautiful woman who charmed him only for him to meet the fate of so many others. Richie, more boldened, tried to save me from that tragic end. It got to the point where I was unable to perceive time as days blurred together. That once enticing giggle of my girlfriend now pierced my ears, sounding like a garbled cackle of a witch. Her comforting touch transitioned to a slimy, grotesque assault. Instead of the gorgeous girl I thought I knew, I was instead looking pure evil in the face. Against my will, my astral spirit was forced to accompany her to different planes of existence and watch her perform abominable rituals with those starfish anomalies. I have seen things no man of sound mind should ever be made to bear witness to. So much blood and secret parties. I was at the end of the line. My very being was abused by my girlfriend, with my thoughts becoming hostile. Filth clung onto my skin from the little scraps of food I had to sustain myself with. My mirror was so filled with muck and other substances that I could not see myself. I considered it a good thing, to be honest. I'd rather have been ignorant than be forced to come to the realization that I allowed my girlfriend to go that far. I knew that she was preparing to kill me at any second, but when, I could not know. All I did know was that I had to do something, and quick. While my girlfriend casually read one of her unholy books, I grabbed a knife from my dirty counter and wielded it as if it were my lifeline. She must have anticipated this because she moved at a fast pace, or perhaps I had become so emaciated that I was losing speed. That giggle again. That goddamn cackle that held a tight grip over my brain like a fly trapped in a spider's web. She mocked my efforts, telling me how weak-willed and pathetic I was. Her sharp, harsh words were like the knife stabbing into my confidence. My girlfriend grabbed the knife and tapped the blade with her fingers. "Do you really think this knife has any effect on me?" As she said that, what she did next startled me. Without much reaction to her cold, green eyes staring at me with intent, she methodically sliced her fingers with the blade. I tried to get her to stop, but she continued swinging and cutting and severing her appendages until they fell onto the floor. That in itself, while shocking, was not as horrifying as her blood. I would have thought that despite everything she would bleed as other people did, but instead of the iron, rusted smell I was accustomed to, my girlfriend's blood possessed a yellow tinge, and her index, ring, and pinky wriggled in the puddle of pooling blood like a living creature. The blood smelled unearthly, abhorrent, and made me nauseous. From the bloodied stumps there emerged small heads resembling my girlfriend's. They resembled finger puppets, but even finger puppets would not be as lifelike. My girlfriend stared at me with amusement at my reaction and flexed her fingers as her smaller selves giggled in that same shrill cackle. I backed away from my girlfriend as she came closer with the knife. I tried to fight it with all my might. Believe me, I had. I pushed and I kicked and I swung punches, but it was all uselessly for naught. This entity held got me good. The last thing I could remember was being handed the knife and a loud banging on my door before darkness. I awoke in the hospital, my co-worker and Richie by my side. Looking down, I saw that I had a stab wound on my chest. Somehow, perhaps the remaining willpower I had left, I narrowly avoided piercing my heart. I looked at Richie with confusion, and as I tried to explain what had happened to me, he responded with a warm embrace. I did not know if some force protected me during that time, or if it was not my time to die. Regardless, with my girlfriend now a thing of the past, I slowly was able to rebuild my former life. I cleaned up my apartment and reapplied to my job at the fast food joint. My relationship with my mother improved after she profusely apologized for what happened to me. My girlfriend was never seen again. The only thing the authorities found of her were her fingers and the suffocating, noxious fumes they were wallowing around in. Even then, I still feel she never actually left. I can still sometimes see her in my dreams and feel the alienating touch of her hands. I can never truly forget how she blackened my soul. What a rough story, with so many morals. There was a woman who quit drugs. That's a great moral. Sobriety's great. I've had comments before on my videos of people that are, that made claims about their sobriety, which, good for those people. Very good. And then there's obviously the bigger theme of relationships. I'm not sure if that was the theme. I'm not sure if the author wrote it for that reason, but that's what I got from it. Pretty ethereal story, but relationships, love, can be a really great and beautiful thing. I'm not gonna sit here cynically and say that it's terrible and awful and love is all bad. I think it's a great thing. I think it's pretty great. I think back in Roman or Greek, I get them mixed up all the time, sorry. But they had a belief that humans once were beings that had 4 arms and 4 legs, but the gods deemed them to be too powerful. Thus they split them in half, creating man and woman. And every person has a person that they were supposed to be together with, combined with, be one with. Every person has a soulmate. Obviously, I don't believe in the whole, 4-arm, 4-leg thing, but I do think that's a really beautiful way to look at things. I believe in soulmates. It's kind of stupid, but, I believe they exist. I think that most people go for good enough, and honestly, that's good enough. But, yeah, relationships can also go in the way that it did in this story. They can take advantage of you, they can change you, and they can really not be good for you. If you're in that situation, maybe consider getting yourself out. Probably more than consider, you really should get yourself out. But yeah, pretty good. The only thing that I wanted from the story was I wish that the coworker's cousin ended up I thought they'd get a little bit closer at some point in the story. But I did like that his brother came through and they mended things, because I get he was mad at him for probably causing an awkward moment at his wedding, but it wasn't his fault. You know what I mean? I don't know what his mother told him, because but anyways, it really wasn't his fault. I mean, sure, kind of his fault. He did get angry. You're always the one that's responsible for your emotions and the control of those emotions. But come on, man. But I can imagine how angry that you might get being told that and badgered that. And also, how can you say that you want grandkids after sending a picture with one of your grandkids from your other child? The story mentioned that, but that's silly business right there. Come on, man, you got what you wanted. Why are you bugging him? Bugging the main character. But yeah, anyways, a lot of rambling there, sorry. Hopefully you enjoyed the story. Leave a like if you did. Subscribe if you haven't. I will see you all in the next one. Ego, Volt, Anima, Vestra.